Blackwell, who's going to do a more proper introduction of our other guest, Maja Ardal.
Thanks so much,
Okay.
John. We have a love affair with the Peterborough Museum and Archives as well. So it's they're incredibly hospitable. They host our Artist Talk series every year. They host our Breaking Ground series. They sell our tickets in Peterborough, which ain't no small thing. And they're a partner in our RR and SS, our Rural Routes and Scenic Stages tourism partnership. They're just really the most amazing organization. And so we're thrilled to be back here. I think maybe this is my 6th or 7th Artist Talk. It's a real opportunity for me to chat with one of the artists in our upcoming season, and usually a playwright, or I've spoken to musical director and composer Justin Hiscox before, and of course Robert and I have spoken before. So I usually know the people fairly intimately. I've worked with them on developing a script or worked with them as an artistic collaborator, but I was thinking earlier this week, I don't think I've ever done an artist talk with someone who I am as close to personally as Maja. I'm thrilled. I know we're inelegant on these stools. These stools are not meant for people with short legs. I know. Maja and I think, probably talk on the phone at least 3 or 4 times a week in the mornings. Just to check in, and we've had a number of different collaborations starting from when Maja was at Nightwood Theatre, I guess in 2006-07 range as the interim artistic director, and I was doing PR there. That's when we first met, and we kind of found each other like kindred spirits. And then we've had a number of different collaborative relationships, including Her Too, Maja's play about cancer that Nightwood produced last year that I was so lucky to direct. Maja wrote it, and then Prisoner of Tehran, when Maja adapted Marina Nemet's memoir, and then directed it for the stage. And of course, now she's directing for us, and I've been looking for something, or she's writing for us. Yes.
You haven't asked me to direct
Not
yet.
yet, no. That's my job. She's writing The Hero of Hunter Street for us about the explosion and fire at the Quaker Oats factory in 1916. And I don't know if you know this, Maja, but I have 4 sort of perfect plays in my life, plays that are as close to perfect as I've ever seen. There's an Endgame that Soul Pepper did in its early years. There is Punch Drunk Show Sleep No More in New York, the immersive theater piece. There's Kristen Thompson's I, Claudia, and then You Fancy Yourself, Maja's play. One woman show, You Fancy Yourself, and I don't know if anyone's ever had the opportunity to see it. Maja won the Dora Award for performance for that show, and she plays 32 different characters in that piece. But what strikes me about why those pieces to me are perfect is that even years later, maybe a decade later or more, I can remember them vividly and real details of them, and the way you were able to capture characters through simple gesture. And so I wanted to just start with talking about you, because, and You Fancy Yourself, you were a little girl, you were born in Iceland, but you moved to Scotland when you were 4. And I'm so curious about that part of your life and how that all happened. Do you want to start there with telling me about you as an Icelander and you then being born and raised in Scotland?
So I was born just south of the Arctic Circle in a little fishing town called Siglufjordur. You'll have to practice that before you go. And at that time, my father was already a student at Edinburgh University. And my mother had gone back home to Iceland to try to do some work and, raise money to support him and have a baby. And she already had a baby, and this is just what Icelanders are like. So then we started to sort of travel back and forth between Scotland and Iceland until eventually my father actually said, I've become a philosopher, and there's not enough philosophers in Iceland to argue with, so I'm going to have to live in Scotland. And so the girls have to go to school in Scotland. So that's why I have a Scottish accent and a Scottish education. So I see myself as having my ingredients are 100% Icelandic. I was mixed in Scotland and I got baked in Canada.
All right. It's interesting though, you don't imprint anything really too much Scottish. I mean, I know there is, but you are so Icelandic in it all. Other than I know you can recite a lot of Robbie Burns, because I've heard you do it. But so what is it about Iceland then, I wonder, that has imprinted so profoundly on somebody? I mean, I know you go back, and you guys went back in the summers, your mum worked, but what is it about Iceland?
Well, first of all, I think you don't really, when you're young and you've got foreign parents who talk funny and you're living in Scotland, you don't want to be Icelandic. You want to be Scottish. And that's very, very important for kids. You want to fit right into the world you're in, right? But what my mother did all the time as we were sort of helping her in the kitchen, doing the dishes and all those kind of things, she would tell me stories of our relatives and ancestors. And she told me later, she's still alive, she's 91, she told me later that she wanted to keep alive the stories of Iceland for us so that we would never lose contact with our relatives. And we never really knew that we were going to stay in Scotland as long as we did. So I believe that my work as a playwright is actually inspired by my mother. My mother's phenomenal storytelling. And her stories were so crazy and weird. If I put them in plays, a lot of people would just go, oh, well, that's an interesting fantasy. I mean, my ancestors and those characters are so incredible. But I think you talk about you fancy yourself. What I do remember about Scotland was that in wanting terribly to be Scottish and to be like everybody else around me, I discovered that incredible sort of vulnerability of an immigrant, and at the same time as discovering the vulnerability of childhood, because our parents had no money, because Dad was just a student. We always went to schools in the poor areas. We lived in the slums of Edinburgh, and we went to the local school. And so I also learned a lot about how you had to get your fists up and your kicking foot ready for in order to sort of survive and get by. So you fancy yourself, for those, most people haven't seen it at this point, it actually is about a little girl who arrives in Scotland, and in trying to become as Scottish as she can, as quickly as she can, she hears the story of the massacre of Glencoe, and she decides that that is indeed the perfect way to describe Scottish people, that if you don't get along, you could get massacred, and you have to be on the winning side. And so that's basically how that play got launched, and it awakened all those memories in me of, I had been writing poetry about the little lost souls and struggling children that had become my best friends at the time. So they ended up getting into the play and getting mixed in with some fictional characters. So it became about an immigrant, about bullying, about poverty, about the imagination. And the character of Elsa survives because she believes that if you dream it up, it can happen. That you can cross from dreams to reality just like that because you feel like it. And when I told, my mother actually said to me, well, that's what we Icelandic people are like. I went, oh, okay, good. Icelandic people sort of dream it up and then do it, so.
But I would argue, of course, as you say that, dream it and make it a reality, that is you, right? And I was talking to a mutual friend, Kyra Harper, and she said, what's so amazing about you is that you just one day decide, well, now I'm going to be a playwright. And then you are, and you suddenly are, Midnight Sun is being produced at Tarragon. Or I'm going to be an artistic director, and then you become the artistic director of the Young People's Theatre in Toronto. So just, can you talk to me a bit, because you trained out of high school in Scotland as an actor, and then your dad came here, your mom and dad, and the younger boys, you have 4 siblings altogether, there's 4 of you, but the boys were younger than you and your sister, and they came with them, and your dad was a professor at Queen's. How did, talk to me about that transition over here, training to be an actor in Edinburgh, and then starting to act over here. Then I want to move into the recreation of Maja Ardal.
Well, what's interesting is that when my parents left and they took the brothers and they settled in Kingston, and my father taught moral philosophy at Queen's University, I didn't have any aunts and uncles in Scotland that I could stay with. My sister and I didn't have relatives, cousins, any of those. We had friends, but we didn't have family structure at all. So it was very easy for us to hop over to Canada, to fly over and join the family. The only thing that I was going to do was I was going to say hello to the family and, bring over some presents and some duty-free cigarettes. And then I was going to go to New York, because Canada didn't really have a culture and there was nothing important for an actor to do in Canada. But for sure I could go to New York and start my acting career there. Well, it didn't quite happen that way, because my sister and I, when we went to get our citizenship all sorted out for becoming Canadian, because our parents wanted that, I came to Toronto and discovered that it was the coolest, hippiest, most groovy place that I had ever been in. It was the heat of the summer, the draft dodgers were all there, there was a smell of marijuana wafted through the air. The people played flutes. It was, I thought I died and gone to heaven. It was
1969?
It was 1970,
1970.
right? And so I auditioned for a place called Toronto Workshop Productions, and the first person I met when I walked into this cool kind of old garage on Alexander and Yonge, it was a guy with a leather headband, and it was just, you know, so I started, it was at Toronto Workshop. I started at Toronto Workshop Productions under the amazing George Luscombe. I started my career right there, and it was a thrilling company because they found a way to be incredibly entertaining while talking about society. It was a social-political theatre company that expected to perform almost like the circus. That was the energy of how to perform, and because I played the French horn and the trumpet, and I sang and, you know, acted, I felt that that was a real home for me.
So I want to ask you about Luscombe because I know you're a winner of the George Luscombe Award, and Luscombe eventually taught you a lot of his. He took you under his wing as a sort of a mentor-mentee relationship. Will you talk about you and Luscombe and the efforts and your time at Toronto Workshop Productions?
Well, Toronto Workshop Productions was completely characterized by this amazing man, George Luscombe. And George Luscombe believed that all theatre should be relevant, that you can't just get up on stage and entertain people and indulge yourself in your own emotions. You have to be talking about society, to society. And this was done by forming an ensemble of actors that then started to train together physically. So we were a sort of almost like dancers, actually, where you'd see 12 actors on stage, and the way that we moved, the dynamics of movement was extremely, you know, highly entertaining. And I stayed there for, we worked, actually I should tell you this, we worked 5 days a week because George Luscombe believed that actors are citizens, and that we should have 1 day off to learn our lines and 1 day to spend with our families. And this was actually completely flew in the face of how other theatre companies were thinking at the time, where, you know, theatre should be your life. You work 6 days a week and you get 1 day off just to recover, and then you're back to work. But George Luscombe, although he worked as harder than any artistic director I've ever worked with, and we did splendid theatre where the actors would fly through the air and, you know, like, you know, play great music and do great sort of social political stories. He actually recognized family. And
the work-life balance.
Yeah, the work-life balance.
Right.
Yeah, whether you had children or not, you know. But it was interesting for me because actually I met my husband Jeff Bronstein, who's sitting right there, at Toronto Workshop Productions, and I was pregnant with my first child when we were doing a show called The Working Man. You actually have a poster of that show.
Jim brought a poster from The Working Man that these guys haven't
It's so
seen.
amazing for me because I had never been treated. George Luscombe was considered to be a very tyrannical ruler with incredible, intense vision. But when I came in there and said I'm pregnant, he treated me like I was the queen. And I mean, if I just looked a little bit like this, he would make me bring a chair and make me sit down. And I mean, it was incredible. It was actually quite wonderful to see that side of George Luscombe. And so am I kind of still in the territory?
Yes,
of the
you're totally
questions?
in the territory. I wanted to ask about, is it Luscombe from which you learned the efforts, and will you talk to us about the efforts?
Well, the efforts actually were based on Rudolf von Laban's, he actually was what did he do for a living? Well, I know he taught, his techniques taught dancers. And that was in Europe, and that was quite it would have been in the 1800s, actually. And Rudolf van Laban studied people, studied all movement, and discovered that there are 3 ways to describe movement. How fast or slow is it? How heavy or light is it? Or how direct or indirect is it? So that could be broken down into 8 different forms of movement. And dancers knew this and loved the efforts, loved the Laban movement. And actors had never actually really been trained in this until George Luscombe, as a young actor, went to Joan Littlewood's company in England and learned a great deal about this physical movement that could bring alive plays in a very dynamic and exciting way. So we would train for 2 or 3 hours every morning before we started rehearsals. So I had like thighs like steel. I mean, you really worked hard in this kind of movement. And it meant that like you could move really fast and heavily towards another actor, and the actor could actually be thrown out of the way without you ever touching each other.
Something like slash? Is that
Yes,
something
yeah,
like slash?
and the thrust, which is like direct, heavy, and fast. You know, Jeff and I should just get up and do a demonstration.
Yeah, just do a demonstration of the efforts, yes, please. Maybe at the end.
And you know, you could create an atmosphere like that by inviting all the actors to float. So they're all sort of incredibly gentle, slow movement, everybody moving in different directions with their bodies, and the entire room would just suddenly change atmosphere. So that's how George managed to create atmosphere without all the set and complexities. It was not naturalistic theatre. We didn't see cups and saucers and kitchen sinks in that theatre. You know, we created everything out of air, space, mood, dynamic, physicality, and music. And language, and the story of people. It was incredibly important to him that the political events of the day were somehow being recognized in the work we did.
I'm wondering, so how long were you with Toronto Workshop? Because I wanted to move you now forward, because I'm thinking about the time you were at the St. Lawrence Company at the St. Lawrence Centre.
Yeah, well, Jeff was there with Toronto Workshops longer than I was. I was there for 2 seasons. Actually, I was there for 1 season. Then Jeff and I got to be in a television series called Story Theatre, which CBC, NBC did. So Jeff and I were sort of suddenly became like these actors that had a driver and that lived in a hotel in BC. It was incredible. And they hired us because Jeff and I could create a story, turn a story into a little dramatic scene right away through all the physical stuff we did. So we were hired. So we got married actually out there. And when we came back, I went back to workshops as well. We both went back to Toronto Workshops. And then following that, I auditioned for the St. Lawrence Centre Theatre Company. In those wonderful old days, theatre companies were hired for a whole season. You could feel like an employee, which is a wonderful feeling for an artist, where you could start work in September and you're working all the way through till June with the same company and repertory. And, you know, so St. Lawrence Centre had a company like that. And so I joined that company while Jeff stayed at Toronto Workshop Productions. And we did a great and then Jeff came to the St. Lawrence Company because people liked hiring couples, and you know, it seemed to be that Jeff and I sort of had similar acting styles too, so they brought Jeff in too. And we went on tour with a quite famous play called Trelawney of the Wells, and this was in the days when they funded huge tours with huge casts of actors and fabulous fancy sets. And we toured to Winnipeg and to the National Arts Centre, you know, came back. And we did some political theatre with Toronto Arts Productions at the St. Lawrence Centre, but not as much as with George Luscombe. But what Leon Major said, I love hiring George Luscombe's actors because you don't have to direct them. They all seem to know what to do.
Really? Was that really what he said?
Yes, isn't it really what he said? Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
But what was it like then? Because you and Jeff, you had young children. You've told me a great story. But, you know, childcare wasn't necessarily recognized. And did you have to pretend you didn't have your kids in daycare and things like that?
Yes, we did have the children, both of them in infant daycare. And it was a wonderful infant daycare downtown Toronto. And at 5 o'clock, Jeff and I would panic because usually rehearsals at the St. Lawrence Centre went on till 6. So we would, like, you know, really have these kind of, you know, we have to get there in time to pick up the babies. I would say, though, that children kind of, in some ways, both of Jeff and I agree that our children kept our feet on the ground. They injected the sanity into what could otherwise be considered a pretty crazy, self-indulgent, self-involved kind of way of looking at our lives, you know, where where you feel that being an actor is everything, and you're special and different and fabulous because you're an actor, and you can live the kind of slightly debauched life because that's what, you know, actors in the 70s were like. But we had children early, so we knew that there was some order in our lives, and that in the end our children were eventually more important than anything else, and somehow they enriched us. And having a child makes you get access to your emotions in a new way. I found that the importance of life itself started to take on incredible new meaning. And I think it helped me as an actor to really sort of feel life. And also because with children, you meet everybody. You're dealing with everybody who is not a theatre person. Everybody who takes care of issues around your child. So it was tough, and it was scary money-wise, of course, at times. But it was also fantastic because we felt somehow that as actors we were enriched by our children. And then we would sometimes just sit and watch them because they were funnier than us. So I mean, they're so entertaining. Children
It's interesting, both your kids have become actors, so I don't know if everyone knows, but Maya's son, Paul Bronstein, played Jean-Claude Lalonde last summer in The Bad Luck Bank Robbers, and is coming back. That's Maya's son. I think
So now you know why Jeff and I would say, shall we go out to the movies or just sit and watch Paul?
And then their daughter, Inga Cadronel, is more of a film and television actor. I mean, she does, and then now lives in Los Angeles with her husband and kids. Why do you think they became actors? Do you have a sense of that? I'll just ask you quickly, and then we're going to get into your writing. But
Paul wanted to have a more meaningful life. He thought that Jeff and I were a little frivolous, and that our friends all seemed to be miserable when they were unemployed, and they would come over to our house and all whine and complain. He said, "I don't want to be an actor. You all seem to be so miserable when you're not working, and what you do isn't nearly as important as saving the environment. So I'm going to save the environment somehow in my career." Well, he didn't, did he? So he claims that he sort of fell back on acting. So he just wasn't really, he was a very smart kid at school who didn't want to do that kind of work, the academic work. He was an action-packed person, a musician, a drummer. He loved the action of living and learning. So he ended up in a theater school environment, and they went, launched himself as an actor, and is still doing it.
yeah.
Yeah, and our daughter Inga, in fact, from a very early age, was in love with performance. She adored acting. And when she was 5 years old, she was...
Sorry, it's very distracting. Yeah, thanks.
When she was 5 years old, and I was doing a one-woman show by Dario Fo called Female Parts. And I had to leave and do a show on Sundays, and it was hard on her because she wanted her mommy to be home at weekends. And so she said one day, "Can I come and see your play?" And I said, "Well, you see, dear, there's 4 little plays, and one of them is called Medea." And
the kids don't come off well in that.
It's sort of about a woman who kills her children. I'm not sure that you should come and see that, but it is only a play. She said, "That's all right, Mommy. It's okay. Don't worry. I'm coming anyway." So I thought, okay. So I trotted her off to the theatre, and I was very proud of the show. It got great reviews, but it didn't get good audiences. George Luscombe had directed it. He'd done a wonderful job, but the houses were really small. So anyway, so my little 5-year-old daughter sat in the front row, and I did all 4 plays, and she was very, very quiet when she, on the way home, didn't say anything. Well, the next weekend, she said, "I'm coming to see your play," and I went, "Again?" She said, "Yes, Mommy, it's only a play, I'm coming." So off she went up to her bedroom, and she came, and then I heard boom, 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 and she was hauling this huge garbage bag full of her toys. I went, "Oh, this is great. She's going to stay behind the backstage and play with her toys while I do the show." So anyway, so there I was, warming up on stage, and she was backstage, and she was doing something with her toys, I didn't know. So I went backstage to get my makeup on and get my costume on, and then I came out to just check one more time, and she had slipped out into the theatre. And she had put all her trolls, her Barbies, her stuffies, and all her dolls all over the entire audience seating area. And she said to me, "Look, Mommy, I brought you an audience." And I kept them there. And the little audience that came had to sit between her Barbies and watch the show.
That's wonderful. That's amazing.
Yeah.
When did you start directing or get this idea that, because you're a very successful working actor, when did you start to get the idea that you'd like to direct?
Well, I wasn't really. It was 1 year, actually. How old was I now? I must have been 29 or 30. And I was looking at my future, and nobody had offered me a job for the entire season. And I said, well, nobody's offered me any acting jobs. I better start fleshing myself out and try some other skills. So I applied to the Canada Council for a grant to study directing at Shaw Festival. And I got a lovely grant, got $10,000, which at that time was great. And I studied directing at the Shaw Festival, and then people started offering me directing jobs after that. In fact, the Shaw Festival offered me a directing job the following year. And that's how it started. It started because I was kind of too unemployed. You start filling in your life. You know, I didn't want to be unused. You know, once you've trained and done all this work as a theatre artist, it's heartbreaking not to be actually offered a chance to show it and do it. But it was interesting as a woman director. An artistic director, male artistic director in town, who shall remain nameless, called me up and said, "So Maja, you're becoming a director." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you've got competition." I said, "Yes, I know." He said, "No, I mean there's another woman director in town." So I thought, well, isn't that, we're supposed to sort of savagely attack each other and just get one of us have to get rid of the other. And then
That's basically what it's like in the corporate boardrooms. There's 50 men and there's 2 women, and they expect the 2 women to fight for the one token women's role.
Yeah.
So then how did you become artistic director of Young People's Theatre? I'm so fascinated by this.
Well, having children, it was lovely for me to be invited to be an actor at Young People's Theatre. You did shows, 8 shows a week, and none of them were at night. They were all during the day. So I had this day job called acting, and I could be at home at night with my children. It was absolutely fantastic. And then gradually I started also sort of looking at the directing. So I was given some directing jobs at Young People's Theatre as well. So when the Peter Moss, the artistic director, said he was leaving, I thought, well, you know, I should try and see whether I can get his job.
And you did.
Well, yeah, I did. And everybody was shocked. I was the least likely person to get the job. I'd never run anything.
Yeah.
And I'd hardly been directing for particularly long. But I thought, well, if I want to, someone said that once to me, if you really, really want something, you can have it. Probably my mother. So that's what happened.
Do you have a sense of why you?
Yes.
Well, tell me, why?
Well, I dressed really nice. And those days, a lot of people thought that as an artist, you're kind of betraying the world if you put on a nice corporate outfit, right? I thought, well, I'm going to be interviewed by board members. Why don't I, in fact, respect them and be dressed pretty well like them if we're all going to be talking about a $3 million organization together and how to help it to survive? So I put a nice outfit on and I laid out a 5-year plan. So I did a pretty corporate thing. Now all theatres are doing that. I didn't know that I was kind of ahead of the game doing that. And I wrote out all the plays that I thought would be wonderful to do at that theatre. And so I had something to discuss. Because I thought it was really, as board members, a lot of them really wanted to understand what it took to do theatre. They were being asked all the time to support, support with money, to support, help to expand the reach of a theatre company. But how many times would they really be sitting down with an artist and talking about, what kind of play should we be doing 4 years from now and that kind of stuff. So I wanted to have that conversation, and they seemed to like that. So they hired me, and everybody all my colleagues were shocked.
I bet the people you were going up against, I mean, it must have been.
There was rumors about me. Maja Ardal went corporate. Which I don't know what that means. I just had a smart coat on. And
What were some of for you, the most memorable productions of your time at YPT that you created or directed?
I think absolutely, there's no question about it. There was a play called Whale. And it was based on the 3 whales that were trapped in the ice in Alaska. And a playwright had written a very small play about these 3 whales and about how the whole world, captured the whole world's imagination, and people tried to rescue them and help them release them so they could swim down to Mexico, down the west coast. So I took this play and I thought, well, how about I make this into a big play? And the way I direct is I always try to look at from the point of view of the main characters in a play. So I thought, well, what did the whales see? What was their point of view? So I invited the whole theatre company to try to understand what it must be like underneath the water in the Arctic. and what life for a whale would be like. What does a whale see when they're under the water? And then, so the people in the carpenter shop they were invited to try to figure out, how do you make a 20-foot long whale? Because I wanted these whales. I want to see the whole thing. Because other people had done the play where they had like holes in this stage and the whale heads popping out. And I'm going, no, we're going underwater. So, and the whole everyone's imagination. So all the departments in the theatre company were in rehearsals together. And one of the wonderful things, of course, we discovered was that when you're underwater and you're with each other, you look dry. You don't look wet. You only look wet when you get out of the water. So, I know this sounds silly, and also the lighting designer, he went into his bath every night with goggles on. and this was not high-tech lighting, but he discovered the stunning beauty of water up against white, the white of ice, you know, and that blue, that crazy blue. So everybody, and the lighting, and the set designer, Teresa Przybylski, the way she made whales, she found bamboo lives, and then they wrapped the bamboo and painted the bamboo. And then she found Tyvek. You know that thing that we all put around our houses when we're building them? Well, the scenic environment was just Tyvek, layers and layers of Tyvek that looked like ice. So at one point, the Inuit hunters are all out, and I brought David from the Arctic, a man from Rankin Inlet, was brought down to be in the show and to teach us dance and to teach us what it would be like to be from the perspective of Inuit people. So the company was a huge range of people, Native heritage, African heritage, Polish heritage, a wonderful mix of actors, but everybody had to become an Inuit child or an Inuit hunter, and all the actors had to learn how to operate 20-foot long whales and little seals and all sorts of stuff. Wow. So when, at one point, there's a beautiful sound that was created by Ian Tamblyn, a wonderful composer that did a lot of my work. And the Inuit hunters have seen something out in the ice, so they run off to tell somebody. The lights change, the music changes, and suddenly you're underwater and you see little fish and little seals. This is the actors in grey just moving it, and then suddenly this humongous whale just swam into the stage, and the audience. I love this way that the noise an audience makes. I can't even repeat it, but it's a nice noise when an audience is getting something like, whoa. So anyway, we got the Adora Award for Best Production for that play, and we still talk about it. In some ways, when you set the bar for yourself as an artist, a theatre artist, that bar was set somehow for me as a director, as an actor, as a playwright, everything. Don't ever forget, you have to see the world from the point of view of those inside your play, whether it's whales or people.
Were you writing through this whole period of your life? Like, have you always written on your
No, I pronounced myself to be a playwright about 10 years before I started writing plays.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, you got to sort of practice sometimes for a while before you actually become something. But I told everybody that I was going to be writing plays. I couldn't do it until I finished at Young People's Theatre. So I finished at Young People's Theatre. I told the board of directors I was glad to leave the place in good hands, good condition, financially, and I was off to write a novel, actually, and based on all the stories my mother told me. And so Urjo Karida, this wonderful artistic director at Tarragon, said, so what are you doing now that you're not artistic director of YPT? And I said, I'm going to write a novel. And he said, what about? I said, about my background from Iceland, my mother's background, 1942, the war years of Iceland. He said, why on earth are you writing a novel? You're a theatre person. You should write a play. So I said, okay. And that's all it took. And he said, join the playwriting unit. And I said, okay. So I wrote a play, and Tarragon Theatre produced it, and National Arts Centre produced it, and it was called Midnight Sun. And then I discovered that, yes, I must now live up to my challenge as a playwright. The beauty of playwriting is you get a blank canvas, but the other beauty of it is that a play is not a complete work of art. It's a blueprint for actors and directors and other people to come and fill in, and finally for the audience to make it complete.
How hard was it to write that first play, Midnight Sun?
I found it very easy because all my mother's stories poured out of me. She had told me a story that in 1942, when those fabulous soldiers all came to the north of Iceland, they discovered how beautiful the girls were.
This is the American soldiers.
Yes, well, in fact, it was British and American,
Okay.
but in my play I made them Americans because they were a bit cleaner and shinier.
Than the British soldiers.
You know one of the heritages the American soldiers left in Iceland? They left an inheritance, a cultural inheritance, and this is what it is. All Icelanders do that.
And that's from the American soldiers.
Yes, from the American soldiers. So anyway, so my mother said that on Mondays, the girls, they would work in fish a lot of the time, just with the herring, whatever was coming in. And on Mondays, they would start sewing their dresses for the weekend dances, and all of them loved the movies. So they would all be sewing a dress like, you know, whichever film star they wanted to be, you know. And by the time it came to the dances at the end of the week, they'd be looking fantastic, and they're fabulous. I mean, the photographs of my mother and her friends are amazing. So anyway, the American soldiers and the British, they all came and they went, oh my God, these girls are gorgeous. They're stunningly beautiful, these Nordic girls. So they invited them all to a dance. And they didn't invite the men, the local men. And this is true. The local men stood outside that dance hall and wrote down the name of every girl that went in that dance hall and published their names as whores the next day in the national newspaper. So that's my mother's story. So I took that and I turned it into this fiction, which was based on, I made it the American soldiers because they were, you know, they had better teeth and they sort of smelled better. And at the end of my play, instead of this main boy writing the names of the actual girls, his conscience strikes him. What a cruel thing to do. So he writes the names of the film stars they're dressed as. So that's the end. So you're the girls that went to the dance last night. Joan Crawford, Lauren Bacall, Hayward. Yeah. So
I like your end better.
Yeah.
I like your end better.
Yeah.
So then from Midnight Sun then, Maja, I mean, you had kind of this incredible first time out of the gate success. But you hadn't been writing before that. Did suddenly the floodgates open and you just start to write? Like
No, actually didn't. It wasn't a huge right out of the gate success in a huge kind of, oh my God, Maja Ardal's arrived as a playwright. It was lovely. It did well. It did well with audience. It was voted the most the favorite play of the season at Tarragon. Great reviews at the National Arts Center, and it went to Boston, Massachusetts. There was a theater there that wanted to produce it. So that was great. But in fact, it wasn't like I always dream that everything I do is going to be hailed as the greatest thing of all time. I mean, that's how you get through as an actor, as an artist. It's how you get by as a little freelance person when there's, you know, the competition is so stiff. But it was criticized in some ways, and I think that was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I had to really ask myself, you know, what am I? And I've done my first play based on my mother's life, but what am I? Am I still a playwright, or what do I have to share? So I had to take myself more seriously. The first time out the gate, it was wonderful, and yet there was enough criticism. I felt, oh, maybe it's not as easy as all that to write a play, you know. So I was humbled for a very short time.
So I want to ask you about you and Urjo Correa, because Urjo is now not with us anymore. But what was that relationship like, and what was his dramaturgical work with you like?
Urjo Correa was a great dramaturg and artistic director, and the only other dramaturg I know like Urjo Correa is Kim Blackwell. Urjo really. And because there's this profession that people call dramaturgy, and it's become the middle management of theatre, and it's sucking up a lot of the money that should be given to the actors, directors, and artists. And there's a lot of dramaturgs who spend forever telling you about, you know, giving you how do you call it, like psychotherapy on your play and all
Or
this.
prescriptive
Or
kind of.
prescriptive stuff on your play. But in fact, Urjo would read our plays, and he would actually read them as if they were real people. Like treat them like they were real people. And he would say, well, when she says that, that's a smack in the face, but well, then what happens? Where'd you take it? You know, and stuff like that. Well, I don't know that she should have let that secret out quite as early. How do you feel about that? You know, so he's talking about them like they're real people. And I love that so much because it was so how do you say that, artificial. You know, it had no artifice. It was wholesome, earthy, good conversation about characters that you were trying to bring to life. And there's recently been a letter that he wrote to me that's been found by somebody at Guelph University. And this girl is doing a thesis on Urja Kareda. And he wrote me this long letter about my play. And she asked me, you know, if I could speak to, you know, did I remember all these things he said about my play? And he spoke to me with such love and compassion, but also with such care, because he was trying to give me criticism. Like, you know, I think that part that just goes on too long. I don't know that they want to be around there doing that for that long, and that kind of stuff. So it was wonderful to read that letter again, and to read what it was that Urja did so well, that he took my work so seriously and then spoke about it like it was real. You know, so it wasn't all about Maja the playwright, it was about the people I had created, which is what you do. You always, and you also work on how do you bring this to an audience? How do you guide me so that we can bring my writing to an audience in such a way that you guys believe every second, every moment of it? It's all about what do you believe. We all agree to believe something for 2 hours, right? And yet the audience has a right to go, I'm not believing that. And that's where you would come in and, you know, catch it, right?
Yeah, no, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And also building on your strengths.
Yeah.
Like what is the playwright doing really well inside of the play? I always do it as questions. Like I have questions
Yeah.
about that, and does that make sense? Because I see them as real people. I mean, I have no
Yeah.
other option than
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So what's the next major thing then that you wrote, you fancy yourself?
I wrote a play for the Workman Theatre
yeah,
Arts.
right.
They had a playwright who had unfortunately collapsed sort of in his ability to keep writing. So they said, we have this lovely music and it's supposed to be a musical about depression, but we don't have the book, the story. Any chance you could sort of write a story that we could fit the music in?
Is this Joy? Is
Yeah,
this Joy?
so I wrote a play called Joy, a musical about depression.
And Joey Miller did the
And
music?
Joey Miller, wonderful guy, Joey Miller had the music already, and a lot of it worked, and he wrote some new stuff. But then my mother, who had suffered from depression all her life, said, Maja, whatever you do, if you're writing a musical about depression for depressed people, you have to make us laugh. So I went, okay, Mum, I promise you I'll do that. So I put a comedian at the heart of it, and then I looked up all those great old jokes about death and misery, and just flung them into the play, and had quite a good time writing that. And that was very much for the mental health centre, you know. So
The Workman Center, which
Yeah.
used to be at Queen Street.
the recipients of mental health care were in the play, you know, with professional actors, that kind of stuff. So that's what I did then. And then I don't remember what I did after that. I'm losing trail.
No,
the
you don't
thread
have to.
of my own
But
life.
I'm curious about You Fancy Yourself and then Cure for Everything, because did you start You Fancy Yourself at Summer Works, at the Summer Festival in Toronto?
Yes, You Fancy Yourself, which I think I mentioned a little bit earlier. I'd written a lot of poems based on guilt that I hadn't actually rescued, these awfully downtrodden little children that I remembered in my own childhood at school. And I'd written poems about them. And then one day I went, wait a minute, I've got all this poetry. Maybe I'm supposed to perform this or somebody. So I started, you know, getting some guidance and, you know, from Mary Frances Moore, who ended up directing it, and threading it all, these poems together, putting a character called Elsa, nothing like me, through the whole play. And that's how she became the sort of catalyst at the core of the play.
But the thing about You Fancy Yourself, the writing is so strong in it. And then your performance is so stellar, and you have this ability inside that piece. I mean, I've seen it many times. I worked on it a couple times with you, as doing publicity and different things, producing. Is just with one gesture, you can become another kid. I'm thinking of the little boy with the nose,
Right.
and Frances with the teeth, and June
Yeah.
McCready with the hair. Look at, I remember them all. I'm not kidding. I haven't seen the show in it must be close to 10 years almost.
Yeah, I know.
But
and I'm
there's
dying
such
to do it again.
archetypes. How did you create those characters in there?
Well, it's great that you say that, because it actually took me, I had 4 hours worth of material, and I knew I had to build each character, but when you do all the characters, you're only allowed one gesture, only one gesture. So that Elsa, for example, to whom all things are possible, her gesture was that she was always lifted up here. Her heart was really high, and her arms were outstretched, ready to grasp the world. And her little friend Adele, she was collapsed. So whenever I was Adele, I would just go into a simple gesture like this. The voice came after that. And then there was Frances Green, the vicious bully in the playground, and she didn't have an upper lip. So everything was done like this. I love doing her, and it's really good. It's, you don't try it, you can actually do that. Just listen. And then June McCready, who was actually the subtle worst fascist in the playground, and she had a ponytail and she was adopted. And so everybody, so she got everything she ever wanted because she was adopted. She had just grabbed onto that as a status thing for no apparent reason. And then the voices came after, so the body, but I did learn everything I learned from George Luscombe, everything. Find it in the body and make sure that you build your body from the center of your body outwards. So you never change your voice using your throat, you change your voice using your whole body. So, and then at one point I had to be girls riding horses, so I had to sort of gallop around and do all that kind of stuff, because there was a horse club, and it was a real status to be in the horse club.
Fake horses, though. They were riding fake horses.
That's right, yeah. So you just ride your own horse, right? And slap your own little bottom and then rear, and that kind of stuff. Well, I was in a horse club, but how many people were in a horse club in school? Nobody here? I had people disclosing to me after the show that they had been in a horse club. And this was a status horse club. Only the in-girls could be in this horse club. And then I had to play a mob of girls attacking Elsa, and I had to be Elsa being attacked by the mob. That was
amazing. But nothing is quite like the singing competition in it.
That was the climax of the piece.
The climax of the piece, where how many kids are you playing doing the singing competition?
That was like 5 different children, and they were all, each one of them is trying out for the singing competition to be, to get the prize. And one of them has to, June McCready can't sing to save herself. So, just like this, right? And David MacDonald with the squashed ears, who's allowed to drink beer at home, his voice was down here. And then, anyway, a whole bunch of them. And Elsa, and Adele Monroe opens up and sings like an angel. So I had to be in full-on voice training, opera level voice training, so I could sing like this little girl that became the most beautiful singer ever. Like I had to sing so beautifully every night. And then Elsa, who sang and acted out the entire massacre of Glencoe, and didn't win.
She didn't win.
So anyway, so that's how that all worked out. And oh my God, I mean, that was the workout of all time. I can't believe it. I used to curse the playwright when I was doing that show.
But you did it all. I mean, you did it in some works it was renowned, then at Passe at least more than once, and then all across the country.
And then at Great Canadian
Oh my God!
Theatre
And then of course
Company.
you went to Edinburgh and did it at the festival.
Yeah, Edinburgh Festival and the Great Canadian Theatre Company in Ottawa for 8 shows a week.
You just did it recently. You did, and we're going to get to talking about your cancer in a second as well. But you did it. You fancied yourself last fall after your cancer.
Yes, I did that.
How was it different post? What was it?
Well,
different?
I learned what scuba divers learned. I learned that I could use just as much energy and not have to use as much oxygen. There's a way of relaxing. All of us need to learn this. I teach it now. There's a way of finding of using energy without using all your oxygen up all the time. And because I went through a cancer experience, coming out of that at the other end, I knew that I had to use that technique. The technique of, it comes from yawning, it comes from a way of using your voice, it comes from a way of relaxing. And the audience would think, wow, you're using so much energy, and yet somehow I was actually utilizing my own oxygen better than ever before.
That's great, very interesting. I wanted to ask you if we can talk about her too, because I talk about this a lot in terms of, it's so extraordinary that you got a cancer diagnosis and had to do a year of treatment to try to save your life, and then from it, instead of wallowing in a woe is me place, you created really incredible art from it. Can you talk a bit about the cancer and how you kind of came upon writing her too?
Well, for a month, I got a cancer diagnosis just before Christmas. That's the worst time for doctors because they leave town. They go to nice warm places when they, So I was told I had cancer, cervical cancer, which turned out to be uterine cancer. And I was told I had that, and I was going to get all these tests, but I wouldn't get the results for a month. Right? A lot of us hear this because they were all away on holiday.
Because it was December 19th?
Yeah, December 19th, 2011. So what happened was that I thought, I don't know if I'm going to see my next birthday, because I actually have no idea how big this tumor is, how much, I knew there was spread, but I didn't know how far, all that kind of stuff. So I started writing a journal, and to this day, the journal I wrote was it was a different language. It was the most incredible. Somehow I felt that I had become part of the world in a deeper way than I'd ever, not outside the world, but in the world. I could somehow feel the pain of people all across this globe. There was some kind of vulnerability in me that had opened up. And I was lucky, because I could write. So I started thinking about, fortune and, fortune and mishap, lack of, my good fortune where I lived, that I could live in a place where people were going to tell me what my insides looked like. And there was all these people, these women in Africa dying who were never going to be told how sick they were, and it was all going to be too late. All these kind of things. So my writing just changed completely. And then they all came back. The doctors all came back, and I was told that I had a fast-moving but curable and treatable cancer. And then my writing went downhill after that. I couldn't believe it. I had to really recapture my own writing. That journal will remain as a very different way that I ever wrote.
It's very raw and visceral. I've read it, obviously. It's some of my prep for directing her too.
And then what happened was that a couple of years later, when I realized that I could actually somehow manage my own future to a certain extent. I mean, we all feel differently about life and mortality, when we have those kind of visits every now, But then I started looking at the medical profession and the scientific profession, science profession, and how they are addressing cancer, and how the individual feels compared to the scientist who wants to save the world, and the individual goes like, don't forget me, but just say me too, There's that kind of a tension between the individual and the scientific world, and it got me excited about trying to find a way to write a play that was not about people with uterine cancer. It was based on a breast cancer drug, the trial for the Herceptin breast cancer drug, that had been a very unusual clinical trial because the women were gathered in a room together regularly to take this treatment. And I thought, this is fascinating. What if all these women who wouldn't be seen dead with each other all suddenly have to be in a room together regularly trying to save their own lives? What kind of play would that be? So that's what it is.
And also, you had avoided reading or hearing anything about your medical diagnoses in the middle of the cancer treatment, but at the end, because you made Jeff read everything online.
Well, I didn't make him do anything.
Oh, okay.
He was just quietly. He was just telling me the good news stories.
Yeah.
This was the best person in my life to have cancer with, because this was the most cheerful fella. In fact, I put some of his jokes in the play.
Yes. But you eventually, after you came out the other side of it, you read your file. And what struck you? What was important about reading your file?
The reading of the file is basically that it completely dehumanized. I mean, the patient is a 62-year-old mother of two, presenting serous adenocarcinoma of the uterus growing in the cervix, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, this is an entire book, and it's about me, and yet I do not recognize anything. And that was a huge part of the kind of separation between the individual and the science for me. And I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about those two solitudes. Because everybody means well, but really, there's another part of it all in the middle that we still have to explore. The kind of, that kind of, can community strengthen immunity? I believe it can. And that was one of my theories when I wrote the play. Can the collective experience between people, the empathetic experience between people, help to fight malignancy? So I started to believe that, and I still do.
Well, it's so interesting because then I talked at one point during my research to one of the Harvard researchers who had worked on the Herceptin trials in the 90s. And now it's everything they're talking about is community and wellness and support systems around people who are going through cancer treatment, and how they're trying to track it and make it measurable. So it's so fascinating that you were talking about it in her too. Do you think, and the other thing that's interesting about what you did with her too, is I know you had a younger character and we had a young mother and a 19-year-old, but at the heart of it, it still is, especially breast cancer, predominantly older women who get it. And you had all these older women in the play, or you created the play for all these older women.
It was thrilling for me to work with actresses who do not get nearly enough work or nearly enough credit for their work, because something happens after the age of 45 to actresses. You become better and better at your work and you get fewer and fewer jobs. It's a very strange thing. I think a lot of professions can be like that. But for actresses, for sure, with film and television and...
Well, the Shakespearean canon.
Yeah.
The canon, they're ready to play all the roles, and a man hits 45, the whole canon opens to him, and what is there for women?
Yeah, so it was a thrill for me to be able to have these fantastic women in the play, Kyra Harper, Chick Reed, Diane Dackla, Brenda Camino, Nancy Polk, all actresses well into their 50s or older. On stage together. That was a big thrill for me.
It was a big thrill to direct them.
Yeah.
I did have to, I said every day I have to wear my big girl pants to work every day. Because you can't, they'll smell it. They'll smell it if you're not prepared, if you're not really there.
Yes.
You know, I'd been looking for something for you to write for Fourth Line for a long time, and I actually thought about you writing the Battle of Bank Robbers. And then when we talked about it, it's like, well, because of the Montreal connection, and I mean, Alex was born and raised in Montreal, that seemed to make more sense, and he had just come off a huge success with us with The Right Road to Pontypool. But then this idea that came from Lorna, Lorna's at the back, Lorna Green.
There you are.
Lorna Green, yes.
Lorna.
Our friend Lorna, who was a volunteer community actor with Fourth Line, came to Robert and said, do you need a tissue or something?
I am, I'm sniffing.
Oh yeah, we'll get you a
Yeah.
tissue.
Okay, just a little.
Lorna said, to Robert, there might be this idea, have you ever thought about a play about the 1916 explosion and fire at the Quaker Oats factory? And Lorna then said, my grandfather and great-grandfather were both killed in the fire, and their bodies were never found. And that how the tragedy impacted her father, George. And so then we thought, well, let's put Maya together with Lorna. It's toilet paper, but we're classy that way. But so we hired an Icelandic, Scottish, predominantly Toronto playwright to write about Peterborough and the factory scene here in 1916. And I'll just say, before I ask you my question, is the first draft that Maya wrote of The Hero of Hunter Street, without a doubt, the best first draft I have ever read in my whole life. And we were blown away by the draft. You capture the personal story of the O'Brien family, you capture everything that's going on at the factory, and the socio-political landscape of Peterborough and the world during the First War in this play so effortlessly. How the heck did you do it, Maya? Honest to God.
First thing I said to myself, you can't write a play about a disaster. You can't focus on a disaster. You have to focus on life force, right? So Lorna and I got together, and Lorna would just chat with me and show me pictures, and I just started to feel the kinship with Lorna. And Lorna carries the story of her family in herself, all through her body, all through herself. And she was able to share more with me than she realizes. I know you told me a lot of stuff, but also just the feeling of being around you, Lorna, was enormously important. We visited archives together, we wandered around Peterborough together, and she told me two things that Lorna told me, and they are gold. One is her father would go out on his bike and ride around Peterborough looking for his dad.
Because there was no body.
The bodies had never been found. And the mother would stand in the doorway waiting for the men to come home. And these two things made me realize that I needed to write a play about a family, and the circumstances, the situation was an explosion at the Quaker Oats, a First World War happening across in Europe, a city all around getting ready for Christmas. But I needed to bring it to life through the people, through the simple daily, ordinary life of a family, and then what happens to that family. And I needed to learn about things like Catholicism, for example, that if you do not have a body and you do not have a funeral, a burial, you don't have access to that kind of ritual to actually complete the fullness of grieving and letting go. What an extra burden that is for a family. So I just kept saying, Maja, focus on the family, focus on the people, focus on their needs. And the other thing was that they were about to move into a new house. That Dennis had bought for them or was buying for them. And then this disaster happened. Dennis is not coming home. And then there's a mother with all these children. What's she going to do? So as long as I just kept asking the question, what is life like and what am I going to do? I needed to find certain energy, other things. And I said to Lorna, please forgive me in advance for bringing my fiction into your story. Because I think we must do that. My life is my fiction to tell. Lorna's life has become my fiction to tell, based on some very important realities. That there was a fire. It was 1916. It was just before Christmas. There was an O'Brien family with these people. And then I had to waken up new things. For example, the little boy, George, Lorna's father, he loved reading. I invented that, and he had, he loved Treasure Island, and that he was going to start. And then when the disaster happened, he realized that he was just like Jim, and he would bring treasure home to his mom. So things started to build from that point of view.
Should have music.
I called Kim up. I said, Kim, I can't stop them. They're all singing. they keep bursting into song. I can't stop them. So that's what happened.
And I said it was fine. And it is fine. And you've written the music for it too,
yes.
Because talk to me about your relationship with music, because you're not necessarily...
I'm not a professional musician,
right.
But I was expected to become a professional horn player when I was 16 years old, and they heard the tone that I could make with a horn. I played in orchestras, those kind of things. But then I looked at my teachers who were all orchestra players, and I went, well, they're all old drunks. I don't want to become some kind of old drunk touring Britain in an orchestra, because it was a tough job. And I needed to do more than just play music. So anyway, I went to theatre school in Glasgow, and I brought my French horn with me so I could go over to the music side of the school, because it was a school of music and drama. But by the time I came to Canada, I was basically just strumming the guitar, playing folk songs, I always had some piano in me. So anyway, it just turned out that I was so close and felt so personally connected to the hero of Hunter Street, the play, that I thought, well, why don't I write the music? Okay, nobody stopped me. I'm going to write the music.
This is exactly it. And then we were doing Breaking Ground a year ago, and I don't know if any of you got to see the little excerpts from the show, but we needed Justin Hiscox, our musical director, who was going to arrange Maja's songs, to get some of that material organized for Breaking Ground. So how did Justin, then and for our workshop we did last summer, how did Justin get them all the music, Maja?
Right, so I'm too slow to arrange. There's no way. I'd take forever to arrange. Justin is much more a professional in his field when it comes to arranging music. So what I did was I played and sang the piano, guitar, whatever, sang all the songs into a recording, sent that recording off to Justin. He fleshed out the arrangements of the songs, and then we had this wonderful day when Justin brought a band in to play, and I said, I'd like it to feel like a folk musical. This is an Irish-based family. There's an awful sort of good sort of feeling of Irish-Italian kind of at the back of this culture in Peterborough this time. Let's have a folk feel to this.
Yeah, you said to me, you called me up and said, it's just like Once. So then I went and saw Once, and I went, okay, now I understand what you want it to be like. But the first time with Breaking Ground last year, you actually called his answering machine, and you sang songs into his answering machine.
Yes, I sang songs into his answering machine.
And then he had to keep listening and rewinding it and writing it all down.
Yes, that's right. Yes, well, whatever it takes, eh, Kim?
Exactly. So you go from writing one person's show, and you write Midnight Sun, which I think has maybe 7 or 8 characters, to, Hero of Hunter Street must have close to 100 characters. I would think we'd be 40 in the cast.
I think I counted 88.
88? Okay, 88 characters. How did you just give yourself permission to go in crazy, or what?
I never write for the stage. Now, I teach playwriting, and I say to my playwrights, do not write for the stage. Write as if you're creating a complete world. So I actually wrote in Peterborough. I was in, my imagination was inside Peterborough. I wrote the school, the home, the kitchen, the stores, the bank, all as if I was there, not actor enters, exits, any of that kind of feel. So that's why it's so populated. But also I thought, I mean, I'm a professional theatre person, and I knew we had to have a device. So there's a sense that there's a sort of a magic feeling at the beginning, where there's a troupe of men building the set, getting the show ready. As the audience, they're kind of almost running out of time. And so we find out, the wonderful sort of, mystery of who these men are.
Yeah. The story of somebody like, a character like Ajax, the strong man, how did you discover him?
Lorna and I were at the archives, and we were reading the newspapers, because one of the best things you can do is just read the paper. And I loved the romance of the day. There's like a bit, daily romance sections that the women all read, and I got some of that for the play too. And in the newspaper, Ajax the strong man was coming into town, and I went, oh, this is so perfect. And at that time I was dallying with, if there's all these disasters happening and there's a war going on and life is struggling and life is hard, and this man comes into town heroically, perhaps that's what this play should be all about. It should somehow touch on heroes. What is a hero? So Ajax, yeah, he's great fun, and he's got a great fun wife, and I have no idea what the real Ajax was like. So I hope I'm forgiven.
But his claim to fame is that he said he could lift
three 250-pound men up with one hand.
So it was a stage show. So I think we're okay to
Right.
have some license.
Yeah.
And apparently also the Ashburnham Ale House here in East City, Ajax is their logo, lifting a 500-pound pig over his head. So we
then
might
Kim
have
calls
that.
me up. Kim calls me and says, Maya, there's a pig. He lifted a pig. I went, okay, Kim. So when
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens. I was with my daughter this summer having dinner after Bad Luck Bank Robbers, or after Give Me That Primetime Religion, my 9-year-old then, and I said, who is that? And I think I asked Kelsey, I said, I think that's Ajax, and he said, oh no, that's their logo, and so
His house was in that spot.
Right, that's where his house was, right, yeah, so.
also they
City.
settled here. They weren't actually they weren't settled at that time. So they must have liked Peterborough and stayed. That's good. Anyway, so George and Ajax, George, the young boy George, he develops a relationship with Ajax.
Well, and there's so much in the play for me about that treatise on what is the nature of heroism and who is a hero, and I don't want to give too much of it away, but there are so many potential heroes in the play, and I'll be so curious who you all think, if you come to see it this summer, please come to see it, who are the heroes and what is the definition of heroism, especially right in the middle of the First World War,
It's incredible, and I would have gone deeper into the First World War if we were doing this as an epic movie or a miniseries, because, there's all that awful thing of the list of boys that aren't coming home at the same time as a disaster, right? But I had to focus. But there's also an incredible thing, and I'm not going to tell you the answer to this, but there is a ghost that walks the
halls or the
hall,
factory,
yes,
the factory at Quaker.
and that ghost was identified by some others and has been re-identified. And I'm not going to say.
But we had an amazing moment around it, right in this room, wasn't it? Oh, no, it was in this room. It was in this room. When
The
we last
research
were.
that has been done since then and the work that has been done makes it clear who that ghost actually is.
Yeah. So that's an interesting little mystery inside the piece. You have this amazing childlike innocence and optimism. Is that fair to say? You have a child, in the best possible way, a childlike quality. Where does that come from in a woman who's not necessarily a child?
Okay, I've got 3 brothers and sisters, and I wonder whether we were born that way, because apparently when it was cold and miserable outside, I would put on a sundress and I would go outside to make the sun shine. This is my mother's story. So it's possible that I was born that way, that we might actually just be, genetically optimistic or something. And no, I don't call it optimism. I believe it. Optimism is when you kind of just think positive thoughts. No. Things will turn around. The things are good. Things are essentially good, and they're all going to be good. And if it looks like a rotten story, you just have to turn yourself into a happy person inside it.
Yeah.
So I think, because I've got one brother who's like me, and I've got another brother and a sister who aren't like that, who are sort of like, like they've got the worry, right? And I think maybe it's just...
You don't have the worry, though, do you?
We're born that way.
Yeah, you don't have it, the worry.
Well, no, actually, when I started running Young People's Theatre as an artistic director, I came home to Jeff and I said, oh, dear God, I think I've now started to realize what worry is, and I don't like it. I don't like that feeling of worry. So I knew that there was somehow, it's either a burden you take on, or maybe you can find another way around that,
When you first came to Fourth Line and saw it, was the Reverend or Pontypool the first show you saw here? I'm trying to
No,
think.
Schoolhouse.
Oh, Schoolhouse. Okay.
I loved Schoolhouse.
What did seeing something here at Fourth Line, what kind of permission did it give you, and how did it inform the writing of The Hero of Hunter Street?
The freedom. For Schoolhouse, it was absolutely remarkable what you did. You had the glorious artistic audacity to have some strange ethereal characters pop out of the grass.
Oh yeah, those Ortolan birds.
Yeah.
I'm the only one who understands
Just
what they
because.
were.
It was so wonderful. And then you had children appearing from way over there, coming towards us, coming towards us, coming towards us. So I got a sense of depth, and I got a sense of incredible relevance to my emotional life, relevance to my sensual life, and relevance to life, community life. And I just thought, okay, this is the future for me. I love this theatre company because you are constantly in contact and connecting and in contact, and you put crazy ethereal creatures coming out of grass at the same time. It's not like you're trying to, let's pretend this is real life. No, this is theatre, and we're using our imagination. And so I loved it. And I felt that the meaning of the stories becomes greater when you mix professionals and community people together. Because you must always go to the heart of the story. Professionals can often fake things brilliantly. And when we professionals work with our community counterparts, we often have to get more honest than we were.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing at Fourth Line that I've always been very aware of is I don't want anybody to think it's Little House on the Prairie. First of all, it could fall into film too easily, having a filmic, and I know it has a filmic quality to it, but I didn't want anyone to think we were ever trying to recreate film. And especially if a play we've done about war, I'm thinking of Wounded Soldiers or attrition, we don't have the sheer numbers to create Saving Private Ryan. So then theatrically, how do we create war or epic, something that's epic? But I also didn't want anyone to think we were doing reenactment. And so I always wanted to fight against that so that it didn't look like it was Black Creek Pioneer Village. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all. I love taking my kid to Black Creek, and I love Lang here, but I didn't want anyone to think that it was that it had a performative, highly theatrical quality inside the naturalism.
Yes, and that's what I love. Really, when we were kids, you turn the living room upside down and you make a play, or you turn it into a wild and crazy storm and a ship on the ocean and blah blah blah, or the caves or whatever. And that's kind of what you have to do in a barnyard too.
Yeah, exactly. Just quickly, because I'm going to wrap up now and then open it up for a few questions. But what are you working on now? Because I know you guys have, you've gone in not to your twilight years. I don't know how to say this, but you don't have a primary residence in Toronto anymore because you've retired to the country home in Muskoka.
Yeah, I can't call it retired. No,
I know.
Jeff and I bought a little house 23 years ago in a forest on a lake that nobody else wanted because they couldn't see the forest, and we saw the forest.
They couldn't see the lake from the house.
And they couldn't see the lake through the forest. It was ridiculous. It's the most beautiful lake, and it's a virgin mixed deciduous forest, and we just oh. So I've been waiting all these years to live there, and as a playwright I started to realize I could. So it's been happening. So that's where we live, and then I thought, okay, so this is Muskoka, and it's some people call it cottage country, but other people call it home in a different way. There are people who live in the forest, on the highway, in the back of somewhere where they can't have access to a car. There are people who suffer in a way that nobody knows about and who are struggling. So I wanted to find those people. So I went to the Gravenhurst Women's Centre, and I started getting to know the community that lives off away from the lakes. And I fell in love with this community. So now the Ontario Arts Council is funding a project that I'm doing called The Untold Stories and Unheard Voices of Muskoka Women. And it's really, it's a lovely, exciting thing that we're doing. So I'm sort of using Kim and Fourth Line Theatre as my mentor. And I want to waken up the combination between the professional and the local community in a way that has been done here. And do it in Muskoka too. So that's what's happening. I'm doing a lot of giving birth at the age of 60, almost 67. Again, giving birth to new projects, and it's great fun.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me. It was amazing. You're such an inspiration and such a wonderful raconteur. I wonder if anybody has any questions of anything that I might not have covered, just quickly. But any questions? Yes.
We met, but we don't remember meeting in 1971 when I was first introduced to George Lusko. Yes, he was a great mentor for a lot of people. One thing I discovered, and these were people that knew him before 1970 and that he started out as a street performer in some respects. And I was told about, I guess, what we call now tailgate theater, where he'd go around to picket lines and put on some sort of a street production.
Right.
Did you ever have any experience with that type of
I was
work?
in Scotland at the time.
Yeah.
I do know that George was a visual artist. He worked for the Toronto Star. I know that he was a young actor with Joan Littlewood's company.
Yeah.
And that when he came back to Toronto, I'm sure he did that. He was wanting to stay connected with the working people. I mean, it was of hugely importance to him that and we were definitely all, unionists in the sense of, wanting to speak the same language. So that doesn't surprise me at all, but I don't know the details. Do you know any details about that, Jeff? Yeah, but he would send us out. I mean, we were off in the streets, trying to bring our audiences in.
The second question is, following that, my two young daughters became quite the devotees of the Toronto Workshop Productions. To wit, the annual December migration to see Mr. Pickwick. But the one thing they keep reminding me, there was a goddamn hard seats in that place. He never had cushions on the seats.
It was like a circus. He wanted it
Yeah.
built like a circus. It was actually very similar to, it wasn't complete circular,
Right.
but definitely the bench seating with very, very thin, it was an orange plastic with a tiny little bit of foam underneath. Yeah, yeah.
It's a bit like our cushions, but we're getting all new cushions at Fourth Line this year. Thanks to Mary Ellen McCamus and Exit Realty. They're buying all new cushions for the show. Yeah. Anything else? Questions? Yes, Steve.
When you're, and this applies to so many of the plays that Fourth Line has done, you've got these stories that everyone knows, and you're writing, because I know that there's a huge interest in the Hunter Street Frequency explosion in town. What happens when people go to see it and don't recognize it? Because there's mythology growing up around it, and it's family stories, and sometimes don't agree with the factual account or a play written on it. Because that's someone's history, that's someone's life, and sometimes people either misunderstand or don't realize when you're doing a play, it can't be what everyone understands.
Well, almost never does that happen, because I think at the heart of it, we have an authentic voice inside of it that honors everyone involved in it. But I know in an early reading of something like The Right Road to Pontypool, someone sent me an email, another one of the families who had a resort, one of the other Jewish families. So we focused on the Minettas and Moshe Bernstein. And there were the Loft Chicks, and there were the Crystals, and there were many families there. And they said, well, what on earth does Doris Minetta's love life have to do with the Jews in Pontypool? And, in some ways a valid point, but what Maya just said a minute ago, as a playwright, Alex had to find that personal story inside of it. And I think if it's an authentic personal story, everyone sees echoes of themselves in our stories. That's what I hear from people. I don't know, Maya, do you want to?
Well, it's not called the Quaker Oats fire disaster of 1916. It's called the hero of Hunter Street. And that's a nice quirky question, because in fact what we're going to discover is that there may not indeed be just one. Right? But that was deliberate. For me it was deliberate that everybody, the beauty of history is that it exists in the memories, imaginations, and emotional life of all the individuals. And we all have our version. And that's where theater comes from. Theater comes from, and this is when I teach playwriting as well. I say to people, your life is your fiction to tell. Even my sister had the same life as me. We're practically twins. And if she wrote her life story, it would have a different title than mine. So I think that Fourth Line is very comfortable in this territory, and so therefore I always felt very comfortable in this kind of territory as well.
And always to remember, like, as I said a minute ago, it's not reenactment. I remember I directed a World War I play called Attrition. I think it was the first thing I ever directed at Fourth Line. And we wanted to we dug out a pit, and we're going to create kind of like, what was it called, where the soldiers were down on the ground?
Trenches.
Trenches and foxholes, like. And one of our production assistants was infuriated that we weren't doing it to actual specs of a World War I trench foxhole because he was a reenactor. And I said, dude, like, this is theater. And first of all, we have like $400 to do this. What we have to do is we got to dig it. We got to put some plywood up. The actors need to be able to come up and over the wall on ladders. And it can't collapse on them. Like, really, that's all we can do. He was so upset. And I just remember thinking, but it's not reenactment. We always have to go back to that. It's fiction based on real events. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Sue. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Anything?
Yeah, it's important to chat about that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. I think that's it for another year. We hope to see you all at the farm in a few months to see the hero of Hunter Street. I'm very excited about directing it. It's a big show. It's like, is that Johnny Carson? It's a really big show. I don't know. My stars! It's a big show. It's epic. It is epic, and I can't wait to share it with all of you. And Maya, again, thank you so much for being so open. Thank you.